So catching carp in the autumn can be a bit tricky because it's very difficult to know where they are. You're not going to see any shows, you're not going to see any fizzing necessarily. They keep a very, very low profile, but that doesn't mean that they're impossible to catch, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're not feeding. So what I want to show you in this video are the steps that I go, the process that I use to understand exactly what Mr. Carp is doing at this time of year. So do carp feed in the autumn? Is the autumn feed up real? Is it a myth? What on earth is going on out there underneath the water? Well, if we look at the carp fishing science, then we know that from the numbers that on average during a given year, carp eat 1.5% of their body weight every single day. So what does that mean? If you've got 1,000 kilo of carp, they will eat 15 kilo of bait in addition to their natural food source. That's an awful lot of food, and that's the average during a year. Now obviously some lakes are going to have more than 1,000 kilo of carp, other lakes are going to have a lot less. Here we've got about 1,300 kilo of carp, which is quite a lot. So that comes out to be 18 kilos on average every single day. That's a lot of food. Now this figure of 1.5% goes up and down. You know, in the depths of winter, carp don't need much food. They're probably not eating at all, in fact. But if you've got water temperature of 10 degrees, so you've got double figures, carp are probably going to be eating about 1% of their body mass per day. In the spring, in the run up to spawning, that figure might go to 2%, it might go to 2.5%. So they really are seriously on the munch. If you've got the right combination of temperature and oxygen levels, carp can eat a huge amount of food. The main driver at this time of year is lake temperature. Air temperature is going to go up and down all over the place. A couple of days ago I woke up to -1 degree, very, very cold in the morning. A couple of days later it was 9 degrees first thing in the morning. So the temperature might be up and down all over the place, but the water temperature is always much slower to react. So I'm going to be measuring the water temperature later, and I expect it to be probably about 9 degrees, something like that, 8-9 degrees. So I haven't done any fishing for the last 4 weeks. We've been resting on the fish at the end of the season, but I have been visiting every couple of days to feed the fish, and most importantly I've been testing to see whether they are eating the food that I'm giving them, because if I don't know whether they're eating it, then I really shouldn't be putting more feed in. Now bearing in mind that I'm doing this from a fishery management standpoint, you know, this is not the sort of thing that you'd necessarily do as an angler, because it can be very, very expensive. While supplementary feeding of fish is something I do from a fishery management standpoint, obviously it gives me a massive advantage when I do come to set the rods out, because I know where they're feeding, how much they're eating, and you know, it's a massive edge. If you can introduce pre-baiting into your carp angling, then it's a huge advantage, it really is. But it's no good just uffing bait in wherever you fancy. You know, location at this time of year is absolutely critical. I've had 2 attempts, so it's kind of 2 nights of fishing, 2 24-hour segments if you like, and I've rested 2 days in between those, and in those 2 nights between 3 spots I've been done once on 1 spot, I've had 2 carp from 1 spot, and the other 2 spots that I've tried I've blanked entirely. No sign, no indication, no nothing. So I've only actually found 1 productive spot at the moment, and that's carp fishing. That's the way it is. I've got no sign to go at. I'm not fishing blind, of course, because I know that they've been eating off these spots. That's why I'm fishing them. I've also fished this lake for the last 12-13 years, so I really, really do understand what they're going to be doing at this time of year. So I've got a massive advantage from that standpoint. But you know, if you're going in blind to a water at this time of year, then you really it really is very, very difficult. Location is everything. I'd probably just go in with some little PVA traps and hope for the best, to be honest, because you've really got nothing to go on. There's no point in piling a load of bait in to spots that you have no idea whether they're going to do a bite or not. This takes years and years to build up this knowledge of information. So pre-baiting is only really relevant if you're going to be spending some time on the water. If you've been fishing the water all year and introducing bait steadily, during the year, keep on doing it. Stick to those spots that have been producing. Keep the bait going steadily in. You don't have to go masses, just use what you can afford basically, because they're probably going to be eating it, and there's going to be a chance at some point, even at this time of year. So I wanted to try and give you some idea of how much food I'm using each drop for each rod. I'm not using a set of scales to do this in my reel fishing. This is just to give you some real numbers, to give you a good idea of, if you want to replicate this approach, of actually how much bait we're talking about here. 3 scoops, that's 180 grams. Then I'm going to grab a double handful of flake. That's gone to 300 grams. Then we're going to add some 6mm Scopex pellets, 360 grams, and then some little 12mm boilies, 420 grams. That's a pretty full scoop with a little sprinkle of Himalayan in there as well, and a drizzle of syrup over the top. So during my tuition sessions here, when I'm working with guests, that's the sort of size trap I get them to fish with to get going. If you set that trap, put a rig on top of it, drop it, and you just move the traps around until you basically get a pickup. Because if you can't get a pickup on that, then it's probably not going to work then on that week. That is definitely enough to get a bite, but it's also not too much either. So because I know this water very well, and because I know how much they've been eating of late, I'm going to add even more bait to that. But that will be the main kind of drop, if you like. The rig will either go on that or be placed carefully over the top, and then I'm going to create a wider spread of bait. 2 double handfuls, that's about half a kilo of bait. So the way I'm setting my trap, I'm using that small particulate, that grubbing mix right in the centre, and then I'm spreading the baits out over a wider kind of bivvy sized area. That'll keep the carp moving all around the spot, but really get them homing in and spending more time exactly where I want them to be, which is where my rig is going to be. So that's a kilo of bait per rod per attempt. Another tricky question this time of year is how long to leave your traps in place for. When's bite time? And that's really always a very difficult question to answer. The way I do it is I leave them in place for as long as possible. I might get a bite in an hour, I might get a bite in 24 hours. You really have to have absolute confidence, set your traps in place and leave them there for as long as possible. The first attempt, it took me 14 hours to get a pickup. The second attempt, it was 12 hours to get a pickup. I had one take at 10 o'clock at night. I had another take at midday. So, there's not necessarily any kind of pattern or rhyme and reason. Those are two very different bite times within a couple of days of one another. You've got to go for it 100%, be absolute confident, set your stall out, sit behind them, and know that it's going to work. So that hook point is absolutely destroyed. I've dinked him on the retrieve basically. I didn't get done on this rig. The bead wasn't moved at all, so I'm just going to pop the kicker off, slide the loop off. I'm going to take a brand new one out of the packet, make sure he's perfect, and then I just reverse the process. So loop through, kicker's already in place, bait screw on the loop, and I'll just take the bead, pop the bead on, Open up the loop. Loop goes all the way over the hook. And then that loop goes behind that bead there. Slide the kicker down like that. Pull the rig closed. And then I lock that loop closed. So the bait's pinned in position. And that's it, ready for action. So this is a rig I'm just testing at the moment. The idea is that it's going to be a multi-rig that you can use with PVA mesh, because that's one of the problems with traditional multi-rigs, is that you put a PVA mesh on them and you can't cast them at all. Now that's not an issue for me at the moment because I'm boating these rigs out, but I'm testing this rig and yeah, it's working great. It's giving me telltale indication, because if a carp picks it up and blows it out, what happens is that he blows that out like that and the bead moves. And if I actually hook the carp when I wind in, it looks like that. Yeah, so if you get blown out, it's going to look like that when you wind it back in. So that bead slid from there up to there. And that's simply because of the blowout force that happens by the carp. He blows the bait out and it goes like that. Probably pushes the kicker up as well. So when you wind it back in, you might wind in like that, and then you've definitely been done then. So that's as it goes in the water. Even if you've had a massive indication, a big drop back or a big pull up tight, if you wind in and it still looks like that, there is no way that a carp hooked itself on that hook. It was simply a massive liner, and you just got to reset and go again. The reason why I've added this second bead specifically for use with PVA mesh is that it acts as a double lock. So we're using a supple braid here, so we're using an in-turned eye hook, and the combination of the in-turned eye hook, the kicker and the bead means that this multi-rig is much more tightly secured. So if you're getting an impact force from the PVA mesh on the hook, even on a vigorous cast from the bank, impact on the water, you've got a lot of resistance there, so that is not going to get upset. You don't need to add additional PVA tape around there. So this is what I've designed this rig to do, and I haven't done the casting testing on this yet, but this is just a work in progress. But in terms of fishing performance, it's working great, and we've had two absolute crackers on the bank. The lead system for this session is simply a running inline. There's no shock effect, so that pulls freely out of there, but I've got a big Telltale indicator in terms of this this extra tag that I've tied onto the leadless leader there, onto the Klingon. If I get a pull on the hook link, that pops out, and when I wind in, it looks like that. And if that's out, then I've definitely been done. So I've got double telltale indication. I've got telltale indication here, and I've got telltale indication with that bead and that kicker. This is a good example of how much extra resistance I've got on this locked multi-rig. I've hooked this on the butt ring here, lead here. We've got a bit of tension on this, and if it wasn't for this second bead, that loop would have slid straight up there. If I'd have done this with my blowback multi, well, there's no way that I'd have done that with my blowback multi, because the whole thing would have just slid up. Yeah, that just makes it very convenient for me when I'm boat fishing, basically, just to be able to do that. So accuracy is everything in this type of fishing. If I'm fishing to a far marginal feature that I can just eyeball it, then that's great. I might be fishing close to an overhanging branch or a feature that I can line up on and just kind of guess the distance from the bank. If it's only a rod length or stuff, then I don't need a marker. But I've got a couple of open water spots on the go here, and I absolutely need to use a marker rod, cast out, find that feature. One of the clips I'm just winding back over and feeling for it. The other mark I'm actually kind of hitting the clip, landing it, and then popping the float up from there. So yeah, it's horses for courses, but I need to be able to fish accurately, repeat that time after time, otherwise I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. So it's just over the back of that spot, and I'm just going to wind it back in. There we go, that's the back of the spot, and bang 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 bang. Oi, it's about 1.5 meters, and I'm now just off the spot there. So that spot is only 1.5 meters front to back, and I'm just going to pop that float up there. So we're coming up on the mark now, and I'm just going to have a little prod around. It's the back of the mark that I'm interested in, because I've pulled the marker float from the back of the spot to the front of the spot, so it's the ground behind the marker that I'm interested in looking at. So even where the lead is, even though I felt it go a little bit softer there, it's still pretty firm. If I move back, there we go, that's really solid ground there. It's 1 meter back from the marker, and then 1.50 meters I'm in the softer stuff there. So I know this spot quite well. We call it the dining table, basically because it's done a load of bites, and I can feel it's about 1 meter to the left of that marker. It's a little soft, and yeah, within 0.5 meter I'm really on some very firm ground there, right behind the marker. Yeah, so I'm really on the money on that spot. It's not a big spot, it's probably about 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters, something like that. So my prodding stick is actually a tube, and that enables me to take a sample of the lake bed from directly behind this spot. I use it as a suction stick. I'm going to pick it up and let it out. A little bit dirty actually, that. I didn't see any bait. This spot, I'd only tried it for the first time last night. This is not one of my pre-baited spots. We're going to have a look at one of my pre-baited spots now, see how dirty that was. But before I leave this spot, I'm going to do another type of test, which is the scrape test, and this is perfect for the boilies, because I put about 1 kilo of boilie on this spot yesterday. So this old thing is actually a fisheries scoop net, but it's perfect for a bait and scrape tool. I would not do this with a landing net, it'll absolutely destroy it, but this heavy stainless frame is robust enough for the job. I'm really digging it into the bottom here, scraping away, and then want to pick it up. There's absolutely nothing in it, no sign of bait whatsoever, and so it confirms what I thought, that basically they've completely cleaned this out. So even though I didn't actually have a pickup from here, I think I had a massive liner on this spot, but they've cleaned me out anyway. So this is one of my favourite bait and feed spots, just because it's really easy to find. It's just off the end of a fir tree that overhangs the island there, and I've put a lot of bait on this month. Didn't put any last night, but it did get 1 kilo the night before. That's a good scrape, and again, and absolutely clean as a whistle. Because I've been routinely baiting this every couple of days for a month, I know that this spot is incredibly clean. So we should get, yeah, damn near crystal clean. That, I mean, that's water directly from the bottom of the lake, and there's hardly any sediment there at all. So carp have incredibly efficient filtration systems. Only 1% of carp poo is silt. So if you find a clean polished spot like this, it's simply down to the action of the carp. Nothing else can do this. You can just see a bit of grey, and that's the mineral content of the bottom of the lake basically. So virtually no silt in there at all. Beautiful. There's no guessing with this type of fishing. I absolutely know 100% where they're eating, when they're eating, how much they're eating. So if you can do that in your fishing, it's an incredibly powerful thing to be able to do, because it tells you so much. Now, just because I know that they're feeding on these spots, there's absolutely no guarantee of a pickup. These are very, very clued up fish. The big mirror that I had last night, that carp has not been caught all year, and the one before that I had as well hadn't been caught all year. That's 7 months of angling pressure, and no one has put these carp on the bank, so they are incredibly good at picking up and ejecting rigs. So obviously I'm very lucky to be in the position of having my own lake and being able to do this type of work, and very few of you are going to be able to recreate this. You know, if you've got access to a set of waders or a boat, then yeah, absolutely you can do that and do that, prove it to yourself. But if you can't do that, you've got to believe that even with cooler temperatures, end of November, the carp are still eating. Even if you're not getting any sign, any pickup, no bibs, no bangs, the carp are coming in, cleaning you out, spitting your rigs and just getting away with it, because that's what carp do. That's what makes this sport so fascinating and why I still love it after so many years. So find those hard spots, fish them accurately, bait them consistently, and the result will come. You just have to believe that what you're doing is right and do it consistently, and just be there for long enough, be the right place at the right time, and you'll catch them. So now that we've seen that the spot is relatively clean and they've cleaned all out the bait that I put in there yesterday, it's time to give them a bit more, and let's have another spin of the wheel. Just back and left of the spot, I'm going to drop my trapper mix there. Then we're going to turn ourselves around, and I'm going to position the rig right on that spot. So I'm just going to eyeball it at a very close range. So I'm actually underarming the rig in position, and this way I'll get a nice presentation of the rig. I'm laying the rig flat basically. So I'm going to swing past. There we go, bunk. Beautiful, perfect. Just behind and left of the marker, and we can row him back to shore.
Wow, that was fun.
When I drop a rig from a boat to a marker float like that, I always drop the rig behind and left, and I row back to the left. Therefore, when I get back to land, all I've got to do is lift up that marker rod, wind him back in, and then there's no chance of him interfering with my fishing rod at all, because the last thing you want to do is wipe out the fishing rod that you've just taken a lot of time and trouble to put exactly on the money. Beautiful, all set. I've just seen a huge plume of bubbles come up in the far corner. I was just about to put its marker float out, and there's me saying that you don't often get any signs and stuff, but it's a really, really horrible corner. It's very, very thick of silt. Very, very surprised to see any fish activity there, but it's like someone popped a Coke can down there. It's probably about 110, 120 yards away, so there's no way that I'm going to fish there, because it's just an horrible spot. I've got a spot exactly on that line that's producing. It's already done 2 bites out of 2 attempts, so I'd be daft to kind of move that spot. But interesting, very interesting. This is the rig that did the bite last night for the big mirror. I haven't touched this. This is exactly how it looks like when I wind it in. So you can see that bead's been pulled all the way up. The multi-rig loop has tightened right down as well. Bait screw right squeezed there at the top. Kicker's been blown off as well in the fight. That's how it looks like when you actually caught one. So I can see the point is, there is no point. It's been completely cracked off. And I'm only talking, it's not bad cracked off, but there's no way that I would use that again. I could possibly resharpen it, but to be honest, I'm just going to change it. I'm in, Phil.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a massive line of the load of leaf around the hook. The bead's not moved. The Telltale is still in on the lead. Yeah, just a massive liner, and that's why you use a Telltale. So I'm using a bit of bait this week, but I'm not doing it because I believe in the autumn feed up. In actual fact, I think the autumn feed up is a myth. The carp science doesn't indicate that it exists at all. Carp actually eat far more at higher temperatures than they do at lower temperatures, as long as the oxygen levels are good enough to support that. At this time of year, the carp are actually slowing down, but I'm using 3 kilo, 1 kilo per rod, 3 rods, 3 kilo per day total. Now, to some of you that might sound like a lot of bait, but actually when you look at the carp science, it's not in relationship to the number of carp we have. 1300 kilo of carp, even if I do the numbers at 0.5% body weight per day, that's 6.5 kilo. I'm using 3 kilo. That's still only half what I could be using potentially at this time of year. And I think personally, when the lake temperature gets into double figures, 10 degrees C, 1% supplementary feed rate, they will have it. They can get through an awful lot of food. One thing that you really need to pay attention to at this time of year is the rig prep, and everything has to be absolutely spot on. If you're struggling to catch them, during the spring and the summer, then you're really going to have a very, very challenging time during the autumn. So, but if you're doing well during the season, then there's absolutely no reason why you can't be successful during the autumn. The way I do it is I drop a hook size, so I'm down on the size 8, so I'm using the size 8 long shank twisters at the moment. A very, very sharp hook, and totally capable of catching some very, very big carp. I've had carp to 47 already this session, and that's a very large animal on a relatively small hook. The other thing I would say is that you really ought to be incorporating some kind of telltale indication system into your rigs. I'm using a Telltale Indicator on both the lead system and on the hook. I've got a little sliding bead that is going to move up and down. I did get done on one rod, and that happens, but the point is that I knew I was done, therefore I know that the carp are feeding at that time and on that spot most importantly. Even though I didn't actually catch one, it's good information that I can use going forward into the session. I know that spot is worth having another go at, because it really should do a bite. So incorporate some form of telltale into your fishing, and that's going to give you, even if you get done a few times, hopefully with enough attempts you'll be able to convert at least one of those into a carp on the bank. So if you've never used a telltale in your fishing, then you go fishing, you catch your blank, and if you blank and you've got no idea that perhaps there was a pickup, there was a chance, then it doesn't give you any information for your next session. Whereas if you're using a telltale indication and you do get pickup, you do get done, all right, you don't catch a carp, but at least you go home from that session with the knowledge, you know what, I got picked up on that spot, they were there, I was doing the right thing at the right time, they were eating, and I just need to give it another go, and maybe next time I'll be a bit luckier. If you're getting picked up and ejected on a regular basis, then that would indicate that something is off with your hooks, or your rigs aren't quite spot on as good as they need to be. So telltale indication, useful at all times of the year, but especially when it gets a bit harder in the autumn and into the winter. It really has been a fundamental part of my fishing for many years, and it's something that I introduce guests to here all the time. You need to know whether you're being done or not. So it's 4 in the morning and I've just had a ripper out of the blue. No sign all day since I dropped those rods after lunch, and take out the blue. Absolutely love it. Just goes to show you what they can eat at this time of year. That was quite a lot of food for to put out for one set, but even late in the season they are having it. So fantastic fight. For 1 minute I thought I was into a blooming great cat, but these commons go like absolute stink. They really do pull back hard. I'm not going to sack him up because it's just too long to keep him until we could get around to do the photos in the morning. So we'll have a little look at him and then send him on his way. Yeah, very distinctive marks on the top and the bottom of the tail there. Should be able to ID him fairly easily. Yeah, fantastic. 34.8. And he's off. See you, mate. Thank you. So with water temperatures hovering around the kind of 10 degrees, I'm still using baits like the Scope X Scoop, which is a 30% protein bait. They're absolutely, I know from my testing work that they are able to digest and enjoy, you know, this bait in quite reasonable quantities still at this time of year. When it gets very, very cold, you know, 5-6 degrees, 7 degrees, something like that, I'll probably move over to a lower protein bait with more optimized water solubility in terms of flavor, such as the citrus. So that gives me more of an edge at that time of year. But then again, I'm fishing really very small traps, very much for a bite at a time, and I won't be introducing any freebies at all. But with a temperature around 10 degrees, they're still going to be eating, and they're going to be eating a proper good quality food bait with a decent amount of protein, and they're going to be absolutely loving it. So it's important to bear in mind that I'm doing this, I'm fishing in this method because I'm extremely confident in the spots and the amount of food that they're going through. I wouldn't be doing this, you know, randomly on a water that I didn't know, for example. You really got to have a lot of confidence in what you're doing, your rigs, your timing, your location, before you do use this amount of bait in your fishing. But it does work. If you're just doing day sessions on a water in the autumn or whatever, and you haven't got a lot of time, you haven't got a lot of budget, then just wang PVA traps out, and hopefully you'll get your timing right and you'll get a few pickups. But if you can spend some time on a water, start introducing some bait, and get a bit of confidence, get a rhythm going in your fishing, and you can really build some very successful winter captures. And they always feel more special when it's a bit at a more challenging time of year. It's a fabulous time of year to be out on the bank. The banks are quieter, so get out there and go fishing. Enjoy it. It's fantastic. It works. The carp are hungry and they're still very capturable.